I would like to thank you all for inviting me to speak today. It's been great to meet you and re-meet some of you, and I think we're having a wonderful conference, and thanks for putting all this effort into that, for organizing. I know I've organized a number of conferences of a similar size, and it's a lot of work to do so. Thank you. And as you can see from the title of my presentation, I've changed my topic slightly. I will now only be talking about one project, mainly due to time constraints. So how do I come to speak about digital rhetoric education? I see myself first and foremost as a historian of rhetoric, mainly interested in the early modern period and in the 19th century. I'm also interested in the history of our discipline, and especially in rhetorical theory in 20th and 21st centuries. And in recent years, I have been working on the history and theory of propaganda also, as well as on questions of aesthetics in the institutional context of our interdisciplinary research project on different aesthetics in Tübingen. So when I talk about digital rhetoric education today, this interest comes less from my research than from my teaching. This is not entirely surprising for a rhetorician, I think, since the rhetorical tradition has always emphasized the close connection between theory and practice. In a sense, maybe this also distinguishes rhetoric from philosophy. Rhetoric has always sought to engage people as emotional and rational beings, to change the world through communication, and ideally to make it a better place. So today I want to talk about this more practical side of my work. I started designing digital courses on practical rhetoric almost 25 years ago, first at the University of Regensburg and then in Tübingen, where I'm now professor of rhetoric. In the years since the pandemic, if the pandemic is over, can contest that, digital learning seems to have become completely normal. This was something we had to learn very quickly in the spring of 2020, and I think we did it quickly and we did it well. On the other hand, digital learning has also come under criticism, at least here in Germany. Distance learning has to face the criticism very often that it does not seem to be very effective. It is said that students learn little in digital courses. The success of our virtual seminars in Tübingen shows that this is a kind of oversimplification of a really very complex question, and that this oversimplification is not true. So today, in contrast to my usual presentations, I want to be a little biographical and talk about my almost 2.5 decades of experience with digital courses in practical rhetoric. So I come to my Regensburg years, 2000 and 2002, and I call this iteration 1 because there are 3 iterations of that course that kind of changed over the years. So how did it all start? At that time, in the early 2000s, the Free State of Bavaria sold several state companies. They also sold land and real estate and invested at least some of the money in universities. In 2000, this led to the founding of the so-called Virtual University of Bavaria, a totally digital university as a kind of a network-like platform for all state university in Bavaria. And they're still active today, so this is their homepage as of last week. Politicians in the state government at that time focused primarily on ways to save money, like they always do. If you record a lecture, that was their thought, on video, you can use it in all of the state's universities and save professors' jobs. It was a simple logic, but not surprisingly, it didn't work well. It quickly became clear that a lot of time and effort was needed to bridge the distance in distance learning. That is, teachers had to organize something like attendance periods, give feedback to students quickly, grade text, and generally communicate a lot. The Bavarian Virtual University was not a successful model, but it exists to this day. In the fall of 2000, and I was still a PhD student at that time, I got my first job as a research assistant in German studies at the University of Regensburg. My supervisor there, Georg Braungart, had always been interested in all kinds of digital humanities, computer philology, but he had also written a dissertation on Baroque rhetoric, so we had a match. We matched quite well. In the winter semester of 2000 and 2001, we offered a first course called Writing Skills, Design of a Virtual Seminar, which attracted almost 20 students. This winter we designed a 12-lesson course together with the students. We developed the basic didactic elements together. These structures have remained almost the same to this day, and although additional instructional elements have been added in subsequent versions or iterations of the course, the basic structure has remained the same. So what are the core elements of that course? First, there is the aforementioned 12-week structure. In the German university system, a semester is usually 14 weeks long. We thought, it's a very simple thought, that it would be a good idea to start a little later and end a little earlier, so that students have more time at the beginning and end of the semester for exams, for instance. We had already discussed at the beginning of our seminars whether a compact seminar, an intensive course about 2 weekends, would be better in the sense of kind of intensity that you can achieve, but also to help students to integrate this course into their course of studies. Together with the students, we decided against this for didactic reasons. Instead, and this is the second feature of the course, we came up with a more or less sophisticated weekly structure, which is very simple, but this structure has remained to this day. The idea was to provide a fixed weekly structure, which we thought would be especially helpful in digital distance learning, and this weekly structure turned out to be a good idea. The course focused on writing in an academic context, in a very general sense. We did not want to design a course in creative writing, in writing fictional text, but we also didn't want a course that was very closely aligned with the specific genres of academic texts, such as a course especially in writing term papers or designing presentations. So we try to achieve that middle between being too creative and being too closely bound to academic genres. We focused on the middle ground between these two extremes. In doing so, rhetoric played a central role because we tried to give the aspect of audience orientation a key role. There were 3 sections to each week, and this is the very simple week structure. The first phase takes place at the beginning of each of the 12 weeks. The reception of theory mainly through a video, a recorded lecture basically, and corresponding PowerPoint slides. The slides could be downloaded and read independently. So there were numbers in the video indicating the number of the slide. Later we added a self-assessment section so that students could test themselves at the end of each presentation. This first phase is followed by a writing task on the topics covered in the video. Students have to write a text that is based on the topic of the video, and they should apply what they have learned in practice, in writing. The text had to be submitted and uploaded by a given deadline at the end of each week. Then, this is the third element, feedback on the text was given by the tutors that we employed for the course at the end of each week, so very quickly. Later, we added the option for students to rewrite their texts and resubmit them to the tutors for another round of feedback. I would now like to present the 12 units of this first writing course. So this is the next slide. And I will quote directly from a text that we wrote at that time. So they're kind of in the style of advertising. And I tried to bring them into English as best as I could. Lesson 1 is on creativity techniques. And you can see the classical framework behind that course. The goal of the first 3 lessons is to teach skills in planning and structuring the writing process. So from the text, painters and poets have always been expected to be original and creative. In recent years, this demand has become a leitmotif of our society. We are constantly asked to be creative at work, at school, and in our free time. This also applies to writing. Therefore, texts, even if they do not always read like poems in the end, must receive a certain input of creativity in the creative process. But what does creativity actually mean, and how does one work creatively? These are the questions we will address in this first lesson. We will also introduce you to some of the many methods of fostering creativity. After all, creativity can be learned and practiced. It is not just the privilege of artists. Then lesson 2 is called How Do I Go About Writing a Text? Process Models. The classical model of how a speaker plans, writes, and delivers a speech has fundamentally shaped our understanding as rhetoricians of what a writing process should look like. Throughout the nearly 2,500-year history of rhetorical education, this model has been used in a variety of contexts. Since the Middle Ages and early modern period, a second model has competed with it, which can be called the form module. In this model, the writer has a specific scheme, a kind of form, at his disposal for a given communicative situation, which he only has to adopt to the current coordinates of his text. These sample texts or ready-made text modules can be found today in many practical guides and writing manuals, including collections of sample speeches and sample letters. However, these ready-made writing recipes also have a problem. They taste as good to the reader as a ready-made meal tastes to the connoisseur. So this is kind of fast food, rhetorical fast food, to use pre-written text and adapt them to specific needs. In this lesson, the process from idea to finished text will be illustrated and applied using the aforementioned models and more recent methods. Lesson 3, how to structure a text, structural model. Should I tell a story to describe something, or should I take a more systematic approach? Should I try to develop my arguments all the way to the end, or should I start with a provocative bang? The familiar tripartite text structure you learn in school, at least in German schools, as an essay outline, introduction, argument, conclusion, is by no means the imperative order for a text. The history of rhetoric, literature, philosophy, and modern textual theory offer a wealth of basic patterns that can be used in a variety of ways: narrative, analytical, inductive, epigrammatic, additive, teleological, dialectical models, and so forth. In this lesson, you will learn and practice these patterns. So these were the first 3, and the next 2 lessons will focus on the relationship between reader and writer, a central topic of rhetorical theory. Lesson 4, who am I speaking to? Audience orientation. In the rhetorical triangle, the audience is the third position after the author and the text. The writer, therefore, must look in 2 directions when composing his or her text: at the textual structure he or she is creating, and at the reader or listener he or she is trying to reach. These 2 orientations often compete with each other. If the audience is not addressed, the text runs the risk of becoming sterile. The author does not reach his audience, his text will be without effect. However, a writer must not give up his or her personal style. And this is the topic of lesson 5. This lesson is about making a connection between the audience's expectations and your own goals. The important question here is, how exactly do I envision my reader? However, you don't always have to meet your audience's expectations. Sometimes it's more effective not to meet them. Lesson 5, who am I on stylistic individuality? In this lesson, we turn to the opposite side of the rhetorical triangle author-text audience from lesson 4, the author with his or her key role. For the author, the text is, among other things, a vehicle for defining and distinguishing oneself as an individual author. The author's choice of style is crucial to self-presentation and identity. With a certain stylistic register, I can position myself within a certain social sphere, a social group, or even a commercial enterprise. On the other hand, I have the opportunity to present myself individually through the stylistic features of my text and to distinguish myself from other people. Certain stylistic devices can thus become a personal kind of trademark. Style, as you can learn in this lesson through the use of stylistic devices, is then a medium of difference, of asserting individuality. The next 4 lessons then focus on the writing process and on style. Lesson 6, a good ending makes all the difference, on disposition. This lesson focuses on the function of the introduction, how to capture the reader's interest. It is well known that the beginning and the end of a text are crucial to the audience's response. Since ancient times, the first few sentences of a speech or text have been used to grab the listener's or reader's attention. Today, narrative theory, for example, techniques for creating suspense, also provide important inspiration for achieving this effect. With the opening of a text, however, I do not only want to attract attention and goodwill, I also give my text a certain appearance at the beginning, through which the recipient then perceives the rest of my text. I create a kind of predisposition and determine the perspective from which what I have written is to be read. Language as sound material. You notice the alliteration that I've kind of overpronounced, so yet you must notice it. A text, whether written or spoken, creates an impression of profile, of precision and persuasiveness, not least through the sound of its words. Sometimes a catchy phrase can be more powerful than the argument it contains, and suggestion is often mistaken for substance. Classical rhetoric provides a wealth of techniques for shaping the sound of a text. For example, the consonants of word beginnings, alliteration, but not everything in the arsenal of ancient rhetoric is appropriate in modern media. Some of it sounds artificial. While the sound of language is immediately associated with poetry, these features of language are also used in advertising, for example, but the language of science can also benefit from the appeal created by the sound of a text. This lesson gives you the opportunity to play and work with the phenomena of speech sound in a reflective and purposeful way. Lesson 8, vividness and imagery, metaphors in text. According to Aristotle, perception works much like the imprinting of a seal in wax. An image is imprinted in the brain. Aristotle said that whenever the soul thinks, it also produces images. It is still true today that figurative language is one of the central means of effective, impressive communication. Metaphors and other forms of figurative language can significantly increase the power of a text and literally imprint it on the memory. Nor is figurative speech and writing the exclusive province of poetry. Vividness is a quality of text that is important in all genres. On the contrary, the inherent logic of images, which you will explore in the lesson through textual analysis and exercises, can have considerable creative logical potential, especially in discursive text, provoking you to leave the path you have taken and find new ways forward. Lesson 9, competition or cooperation, image and text. Today, writing in the context of a comprehensive media literacy must always expect to be juxtaposed with images, to cooperate with them, or even to compete with them. Images, mostly electronic, have become rivals in the battle for the reader's or user's attention. But the relationship between image and text can also be cooperative, as in the image-text dialogue, for instance, of a cartoon. Such cooperation can also be found in the old tradition of the emblematic or in modern advertising. When words respond to images, we speak of a dialogical relationship. When words point to images, it is a pointing relationship, a kind of deixis. When words themselves create images and writing becomes an image, we can speak of writing as image, of a writing as image relationship, for instance, in the case of typography. In this lesson, you can develop and practice specific spellings for the media competition between image and text. So we come to the last 3. They deal with revising texts and techniques of collaboration and cooperation. Lesson 10, Contrast and Outline. This lesson focuses on the metaphor of relief as a central aspect of a text style. In written text, unlike spoken texts, volume or intonation are not available as a means of emphasizing narrative or argument. In addition, the kind of snippet culture of today's information technologies tends not to be particularly interested in texts being thoughtfully designed or shaped. Rather, the internet delivers its information additively. We wrote 23 years ago, one thing to another, one thing next to another, all of equal value, rather than hierarchically. For written text, however, there is a need for internal structuring to separate valleys from peaks, and thus to model the peaks particularly sharply. This lesson will provide you with methods and techniques for accentuating the landscape of a text to make it stand out. Lesson 11, getting to the point, conciseness, and asceticism. Information systems on the internet provide us with an ever-increasing amount of texts. That was new at that time. Google was something that was really new. Reducing it to the essentials, that is, distinguishing between what is important and what is not, has become increasingly difficult, but at the same time, extremely important. Only those points that are highlighted as important and significant in a text from a plethora of insignificant and irrelevant information can be effective, otherwise they will simply be lost. So at that time we kind of reflected on what does the internet mean with all this information overload in terms of how can we write in a kind of digital context to be seen as a writer. A black and white image can express more than a color film, if only because it breaks the dogma of much helps much in the media society. In this sense, reduction and esquisses can be virtues of text production, at the same time an opportunity for written language. In this lesson you will develop and practice strategies for reducing and focusing on the essential. And the last lesson, 12, the writer as a collective, collaborative writing. Researching, communicating, and producing text are increasingly collaborative team activities. That was a new point almost 2 decades or more than 2 decades ago. Techniques of collaboration. Under the conditions of the new media, the expertise of a number of partners can and must often be combined at an early stage and synergies exploited. If the ability to work in a team is one of today's key skills, then the ability to write collaboratively is a key skill that is important for 2 reasons. On the web, when preparing a project proposal, and last but not least, during the course of study in collaborative papers or collaborative project presentations. In this final lesson of the course, you will have the opportunity to work on this key skill and practice collaborative writing. And these are the 12 lessons that will be completed each in 1 week. So much for the contents and the course of writing. Based on the fundamentals of the course that we developed together with the students, we recorded videos in the following 2 semesters. Summer semester 2001 and the winter semester 2001 and 2, and set up a password-protected platform on which the videos were hosted, which was something that was not easy at that time. Hosting videos. Keep in mind, this was the kind of stone age of the internet. Wi-Fi had just been installed in our department building. That was in winter 2001. Digital recording equipment and digital editing of films was completely new. There were also very few options for streaming movies. At that time, we decided to use the now completely obsolete real media format because it was the only format available actually for streaming content. And I'll show you 2 screenshots from my biography. The person on the left, that's Georg Braungart. And the person on the right, that's me back then. Recording videos, this is a screenshot from one of the videos that we shot in the office back then with a really very expensive, very large camera, that produced videos in very low resolution and in actually very bad quality and costed 20,000 euros or so, really expensive equipment. So that was back then. This version of the course has been running successfully at the Virtual University of Bavaria for more than 20 years. It's still online. They still use me. They've never asked me if I'm okay with this. I've got actually mixed feelings about this because the videos were really not amateurish. This is still the course homepage. Of course, it's classic. It's the classic side of the program they have, but the course is still running every semester, and it still somehow attracts students. However, it's not the course itself that has changed, but the practical side. 3 things were introduced over time. The first thing is something. I think I have a slide here or so. No. The first thing is blended learning. That was a new word then. When we were working on the design of the course, we noticed that there was a very promising new term in the discussion about digital learning in the US, blended learning. At that time, the concept was still largely unknown in Germany. What we introduced was very simple, an on-site seminar in which we discussed, critiqued, often revised the students' text together on a weekly basis. So we met every Wednesday, I think, Wednesday afternoon. Not everyone in the digital course participated, of course, but many found it useful to meet in person once a week and discuss texts. The second thing was submitting anonymously. When we held the first writing seminars, we quickly realized that students were often afraid to expose themselves through their writing. So we introduced the ideas of submitting work under a pen name. These texts then received feedback from the tutors, but over time we also introduced a system of peer feedback as soon as a functioning platform made this possible. Students then not only had to write a certain number of texts, but also had to critique, revise, comment the text of their peers in a respectfully and reasoned way. In this way, we also tried to improve their judgment. And the third thing is also something that is totally common today. At the beginning, it's the portfolio system, we called it. At the beginning of the course, we considered the exercises as homework. At the end of each class, there were a number of assignments that students had to turn in within a few days. The instructors and tutors would then give feedback on the submitted texts. Over time, we realized that a better system was what we called the portfolio system. The weekly submission and feedback remained the same, but the submitted texts were placed in a kind of student portfolio where they could be revised and improved over the course of the semester. At the end of each semester, students submitted a selection of what they thought were their best text electronically, and these texts were then reread by the tutors and graded by the instructors. This system was very well received because it allowed students to work continuously on their text over a longer period of time, which increased their kind of self-perception of their learning and actually improved their text. Then comes iteration 2 that took place in 2000, 2003 through 2006 in Regensburg and then in Tübingen. In 2002, we applied for third-party funding from the Virtual University of Bavaria for a second course on oral speaking called Speaking Skills. This course was to complement the writing course. This time we wanted to make the whole project more professional in terms of media production. We didn't want to do it ourselves and hired someone professional. At the time, the state of Baden-Württemberg also had set up its own virtual university. We decided to team up with Joachim Knape from the Department of General Rhetoric at the University of Tübingen and to kind of set up a joint project. In Regensburg, we would focus on monologic speech, while in Tübingen, our colleagues would develop a third course on conversation and dialogue. We also plan to revise the writing course and professionally re-record the videos. The two virtual universities funded the project with a total of about €500,000. Two teams were formed and initially worked in parallel in Regensburg and in Tübingen. But Georg Breitbart was then offered the opportunity to move to Tübingen as a professor of German, which he of course accepted, and so we all ended up in Tübingen in the fall of 2003. Work on these three courses continued then until early 2006. In the following, I would like to focus very briefly on the speaking skills and present its structure and content. Didactically, the three courses were organized in a very similar way like the first course. The course also consisted of videos, PowerPoint slide, and tutored exercises. The public speaking course also included a mandatory face-to-face session, as we felt that monologue speaking requires a kind of in-person session, in-person audiences. In these post-pandemic times, we may think differently today about that, but that's the way we designed it. The course again consisted of 12 lessons, divided into different units. These units are quite abstract, but then become more concrete through the videos and exercises. This is in German, but I'll explain it very briefly. We also have different subsections. The course begins with a discussion of what rhetoric is, obviously. The foundation of the course is mainly Neo-Aristotelian rhetoric, so it aims at persuasion as the central function of speech. The second lesson is devoted to creative techniques again, such as brainstorming, clustering, as well as topics from classical rhetoric. This is followed by a role-playing exercise that involves a change of perspective. Students are asked to put themselves in the shoes of another student to find arguments or points of view. This is followed by a lesson on the theory of speech acts, which shows how speakers act using language. Exercises in this lesson relate to the different types of speech acts. The goal here is to develop kind of awareness of the pragmatic dimension of language, which is at the heart of rhetoric, because rhetoric always, of course, has kind of a pragmatic dimension. Lessons 4 and 5, as well as 6 through 7, are separate units. Lessons 4 and 5 deal with what we have called structural competence, based on main concepts of linguistics. Narrating, describing, and arguing are the three basic superstructures in the 1970s text theory of the Dutchman Van Dijk. Lessons 6 and 7 then deal with another much more rhetorical perspective called strategic competence. This focuses on the function of texts, which can use different structures, of course. The strategic goals of communication are to inform the audience on a factual basis and to persuade them in the sense of changing the attitude. Finally, lessons 8 deals with affirmation, which is the main goal of epideictic rhetoric. The topic of an epideictic speech, such as the praise of a person, is not controversial in nature, but rather the speech of praise aims to reinforce and reaffirm values, often in a ritual setting. So this is here the Präsenz-Sitzungsphase. The students are required to give affirmative speech, and the class then gives collective feedback. There's pretty much like a workshop, actually, a workshop session. 4 more lessons followed by another face-to-face session here at the end. These lessons cover 2 topics which we have called construction competence and performance in media. The 2 construction skills lessons focus on 2 areas of classical rhetoric, obviously dispositio and allocutio. You can also see how we have integrated modern theories of linguistics, especially pragmatics, with elements of classical rhetoric in the course. It's actually a mix of modern and old theories. Overall, the course places more emphasis on abstract skills than on stylistic exercises. There's really not much about style in that course. For example, and the abstraction is made concrete in the exercises. The last 2 lessons then get very specific. The focus is on the use of media and body language, facial expressions and gestures. And this phase is followed by a face-to-face session where kind of students give their final speech. And if you look at the right column here, that kind of goes into that final speech. These 4 stages led up to the final face-to-face session. Accompanied by feedback from tutors and peers, students are expected to deliver a speech that they have been working on and revising throughout the semester. So let me summarize for the moment. I've now introduced you to 2 courses, one on writing and one on speaking. Due to time constraints, I cannot go into detail about the 3rd course on conversation skills, dialogue. But it really works in the same kind of basic structures. So these 3 courses are very consistent also in their didactic principles and how they work in generally. These 3 courses have been offered by my university, the University of Tübingen, since 2006. They are currently part of the so-called transdisciplinary course program. That is a part of the BA program, a mandatory part of the BA program, in which students have to acquire 21 ECTS points outside of their subject studies. That is really a large program which also includes language skills and computer skills and courses on sustainability and all that kind of stuff, but it also includes the virtual rhetoric program. Approximately 450 students per year complete one of these 3 courses, which means that several thousand students have acquired rhetorical skills in Tübingen since 2006. Each course is supervised by a research lecturer and a total of about 15 student research assistants. So there's a lot of personnel involved here actually to do all this kind of giving feedback, grading. But I think we can say that the course in itself was a great success. There were also reports by the local press that I'm not going to show because that's in German. But also very interesting how the public notices this kind of developments at the university. The next paragraph is entitled Iteration 3. So this is the 3rd version, which took place very recently, 2020 to 2022 in Tübingen. A lot of time obviously has passed since 2006. Back then we planned the course concept according to the current state then of digital didactics and also media aesthetics. In retrospect, it was the stone age of digital teaching, and it also looks like it was some kind of artifact coming from a different era that somehow survived. Over the years, the videos have not changed, but much of what goes with them has. So what we could change easily, we changed. In particular, the exercises and tutorial support concept have been continuously improved. For example, a glossary of key concepts has been developed to accompany the lessons, and a pool of additional exercises has been added. There's very much material around these kind of courses. New exercises have been designed to meet today's challenges of diversity and individuality. The videos, which are almost 20 years old, almost exclusively use old German surnames such as Bernd, Michaela, Tobias, Petra, or Markus, which are no longer representative of today's society and also the student body. There was a kind of really a bias in that we didn't notice back then. Gender stereotypes appear in the old videos, which we didn't think about at that time, but which are almost unacceptable today. Pretty much like this hotel building is kind of a relic from the past, and in the artwork it presents. People in supervisor positions or with a PhD are always male in the videos. Yeah, that's a kind of gender bias that we had then. Since the videos cannot be reshot due to cost and lack of financial support, the stereotypes in the exercises have to be at least partially compensated in the exercises. So we kind of changed the exercises and because we couldn't change the videos. Other innovations are of a more technical nature. Nevertheless, I would like to outline them. As I mentioned, originally we used this kind of obsolete real media format for videos. In the early 2000s, real media made it possible to stream videos at different bandwidths. Even students with poor internet connections could view the videos, albeit in lower quality. And there were not many technical possibilities available at that time. This video format is now obsolete. The company still exists, but the format is not used anymore. And there are better and more efficient codecs for streaming now, as well as much better platforms for hosting video. And what we've done in the last 2.5 kind of decades is kind of converting. Recently, it also has become clear that data security has become a major issue for university. The entire virtual rhetoric course was originally hosted on a website that a developer had built especially for us. Especially last year in 2023, there was a serious hacking attack on the University of Tübingen. And because of that, we were not allowed to use this kind of website anymore. The course must move to the Moodle platform to comply with new security regulations set up by the university's administration. So we were also forced to change things. However, the main problem was not easy to solve. The old videos, which were obviously showing their age, and I'm going to show you here. Maybe it was in 2006. It already was a bit old-fashioned, but today this kind of has become unbearable. Sometimes the videos look so old you think you're back in the 1970s. Yeah, it pretty looks like we had it in public TV, something like Telekolleg, where you could watch videos on many things, educational in nature, that really looks like from back in the 70s. But my colleague Georg Braungart had a brilliant idea here, together with Tobias Schmohl, who used to work at the Virtuelle Rhetorik and is now a professor at the University of Applied Sciences in northern Germany. The old videos were kind of recontextualized. They used to use the material and put them in a new context. The old videos were very long, up to 30 minutes. And in our era of TikTok, nobody wants to watch videos that are more than a couple of minutes anymore. I can see that on my YouTube channel. You can get all the data where people stop watching your videos, and it gets really, the curve gets down very fast. So they used the old videos and cut them up into kind of shorter snippets. They also developed a frame narrative. Yeah, it's the old video, it's the old TV, and a kind of frame narrative. It's a video cassette, also a sign of age. They also developed a new frame narrative. They imagined students in a shared accommodation watching these old videos out of fun, as if they were looking through a window into a bygone era. So they had this kind of frame narrative, and they could put the old videos into that and kind of recontextualize the old material and made something new out of that. This made it possible to use the old video material and adapt it to new viewing habits with comparatively little effort and without having to reshoot everything. So I come to a conclusion. I've given you a brief insight into the project on virtual rhetoric training for students at the University of Tübingen. You could see how we started more than 2 decades ago with very simple means, but a didactic concept that has proven to be at least viable to this day. The combination of classical rhetoric and modern theory, the practical exercises and the intensive supervision of students by tutors have all proved to be feasible. Several thousand students have attended the course to date. In evaluation, students have repeatedly emphasized the flexibility in terms of time that such a digital course allows. Many of our students have to work, and many have hardly any time during the day for these key skills alongside their disciplinary studies. Digital teaching offers flexibility in this regard in the interest of our students. This is an experience that appears in the evaluations time and again. The other is that students also value it when digital teaching is complemented by face-to-face sessions, not too often, but from time to time, when they can see each other in person. That's exactly what we were missing during the COVID pandemic, I think. The mix of remote and face-to-face learning, that should also always be there. Digital teaching offers many advantages in a clever mix of all these different aspects. There's just one advantage it doesn't offer that politicians were counting on 20 years ago. Digital teaching is not cheaper, it does not save money, and it does not save teaching staff. Thanks. Thank you.